A lot of times training for performance is not necessarily, it can be at odds with training for longevity, right? Because trying to raise your VO2 max in 4 weeks, you're going to get a lot fitter than you are now really quickly, but you're not going to be able to sustain that forever. And if you try to do that forever, you would probably end up hurt.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the Best You podcast. My name is Nick Carrier, body optimization coach and creator of the 10-Week Transformation. The mission of the show is to help you get closer to the best version of yourself in every single area so that you can live a more meaningful and impactful life. Today's episode is a masterclass in fitness and training and nutrition, especially in terms of longevity. And today we have Griffin Moore. Griffin is a physical therapist, exercise scientist, and former collegiate baseball player with a deep passion for helping people stay strong, healthy, and resilient, especially as they age. In this episode, Griffin shares some of the most important blood panel numbers that you should be monitoring. He talks about how to reduce dangerous visceral fat. He talks about how to build stronger bones to prevent conditions like sarcopenia. He breaks down exactly how heavy you need to lift, what types of resistance training matter most, especially for women who are above 60, and how to strategically train so that your VO2 max is more optimal for cardiovascular health. Whether you're in your 20s or you're in your 70s, this episode is going to give you evidence-based blueprints for building a healthier, longer life. I'm telling you, get out your notebooks for this one because you don't want to miss the game-changing practical advice that he's going to share that you can then implement. But for now, it's time to get closer to your best you. Let's dive in. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by the one and only Griffin Moore. Griffin, I'm pumped for this conversation. We've had a couple of conversations off camera about a lot of different things, health and fitness-wise, nutrition, fitness, and longevity and stuff like that. And I'm super excited to see where this conversation goes. We got some stuff planned, but I know we'll dive deep into kind of some longevity stuff, some nutrition stuff, different cardiorespiratory types of training, VO2 max, zone 2, all that kind of stuff. But you work for a very unique company in Paradigm Health here in Nashville, which is kind of the first one in Nashville that is kind of medicine 3.0.
Yep.
So I want you to start just kind of by telling people what it means by medicine 3.0 and how it's kind of more, I'll just start off giving the very just general of it's not treating disease, it's like preventative of certain things. So I'll let you run with kind of what is medicine 3.0.
Yep. So I think to truly define that, we need to back up what was medicine 1.0. And so if you think about that, that was back in, I guess, the dark ages when you'd get a cold and they would bloodlet you and do things like that, things that harmed you, right? And so then through the years, we progressed to medicine 2.0, and that's where medicine got a lot better. We weren't harming people anymore, but at that point, we're more managing symptoms, diseases. We're helping people that are already sick, okay? And it's very good. I mean, we've gotten very, very good at, acute injuries. Like if you get in a car wreck or something, you go to the ER, you've got generally a pretty good chance of living with most things. But we're missing a lot of the chronic disease stuff. So like diabetes, heart disease, that is no matter what we've done as a country over the last 50 years, those rates have continued to rise. And so that's kind of where medicine 3.0 comes in, because it's just a different approach where instead of waiting until people are sick, until they have diabetes, until they've already had a heart attack to start treating that, we try to get out in front of it and look for markers and look for things that are indicative that might be in someone's future, and try to prevent it before it happens.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think, if somebody has heart disease, they might get some sort of medication. So it's acting in advance of that. It's acting proactively of that. I know that one of the things that's going to be super hard for people to take action is because oftentimes people need to be in big enough pain to take action. Like some people don't hire a fitness trainer until they're very out of shape. Some people don't hire a marriage counselor until their marriage is in shambles. And so hopefully I think more and more people are going to get ahead of things and people are going to be more proactive in the health area of their life. I know we're seeing it more and more. It's becoming more and more popular. Is just curious, is the medicine 3.0, was that coined by Peter Attia, or was it?
I believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
he's kind of the most famous, I would say, guy doing this. He's the social media guy and great at it.
Yeah.
I think he is the one that coined that term, I believe.
Gotcha. Cool.
So credit to Peter.
Yeah.
Peter, we're not stealing that term.
Totally. I know at Paradigm Health, one of the first things that you guys do with certain clients that come in is do a longevity assessment.
Yep.
And it's a long initial visit, running a lot of different tests, collecting hundreds of data points. And so we can't talk through all hundreds of data
Right.
points and maybe all the tests, but give us a general overview of what are some of the different things that people are getting tested, and just give me what they are, and then we'll kind of maybe dive into each a few of them as to why they matter a lot.
Yeah. So the very first thing people do before they ever step in the building is they go get a extremely extensive lab panel. I don't know off the top of my head how many things we test, but it's everything from your hormones like testosterone and thyroid hormone to your vitamin levels to ferritin and C-reactive protein that are kind of markers of systemic inflammation. But it's honestly overwhelming how much it is to get looked at. And then most people also do what's called a CT calcium score, and that's basically a scan of your heart to see if you have any calcified plaques in your coronary arteries of your heart. So you do those two things prior to coming in, and then the day you come in, the first person you see is either Dr. McAvoy or Dr. Edwards, and you sit down with them, and for about 20, 30 minutes usually, or longer, it just depends on the person, you kind of tell them your story and tell them what's going on, what you're worried about, what your family history is, and then from there they take vitals, do all your normal doctor stuff like a physical would be, but they also look at, they do an echocardiogram of your heart, which is basically looking at the structural components of your heart, and with that they're looking for things like aneurysms. So they look at your heart, your aorta, and most people don't need to worry about that, but it's good to check for in case you have it. From there, you'll usually go in and do a DEXA scan, which is looking at bone density, muscle mass, subcutaneous and visceral fat, which is something I use. So they do that before they come into me. After the DEXA scan, they'll usually come in with me, and with me they spend about an hour, and we do what's called a DARI motion capture screen, which is kind of a 3D system that basically turns you into a skeleton, and we run through about 25 or 30 movements, nothing crazy. But the DARI gives me data, hard numbers on how you move. So for me, it makes it a little bit more like the lab draws, as in I'm not watching you squat and go, oh yeah, you shift a little bit to your left. I can see, oh, you're shifting 3.2 degrees to your left. So it just makes tracking a little bit easier. From there, we do a battery of tests that are more physical in nature, things like grip strength, things you might have heard of, some balance testing, but all tests that we have data on how they relate to either all-cause mortality, cardiovascular risk, etc. So that takes about an hour, and then you go in with Dr. McAvoy or Edwards again, and you do what's called a CPET, a cardiopulmonary exercise test. And with that, that's very similar to a stress test, but you're also measuring a metric called your VO2 max, which we can get into. But it is the number one predictor of longevity, so it's a very important one. And then you cool off, dry off your sweat. It's a pretty tough test. Yeah. And then you sit down with them and you spend the next hour going over everything. So most people are in the clinic for somewhere between 4 and 5 hours on that day. So it's a physical, but it's probably the most extensive physical you can imagine.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Now, there's a couple that I want to maybe touch on a little bit and dive into, and you tell me whether some of these things are your wheelhouse or not. With lab panels.
Yep.
Like you said, it's a crap ton of numbers.
Yep.
Where it can be very overwhelming, and there's going to be a lot of numbers in there that are important for different people.
Yep.
But are there like ones that you feel like are most important that you definitely want to make sure that you identify and look at and see where they're at?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm not a physician, so this is not my scope of practice necessarily, but just I mean, I did these personally, so I can tell you from a personal anecdote, I think the ones you really, really want to make sure you check are your lipids, number one. So that's your cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglycerides, your kind of metabolic markers, which is insulin, fasting, A1C, fasting glucose, and then your sex hormones, so testosterone, estrogen. From there, a lot of the other ones are very important, don't get me wrong, but those are kind of your meat and potatoes, where if there is some kind of dysfunction going on, it'll show up in those a lot of times.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, the lipids, the metabolic panel, lipids being the cholesterol, metabolic panel being things like fasting glucose, fasting insulin, A1C, and then your sex hormones. I like it. Let's go ahead and dive into the DEXA scan. So in DEXA scan, like you said, you get bone density, you get your body fat percentage, but then you also get it from the standpoint of subcutaneous fat, visceral fat, and then you get, like I said, bone density. Let's dive into visceral fat a little bit.
Yeah.
So for those people who might not know the distinction between the two, subcutaneous fat is kind of the fat that you would be able to grab on your skin. The kind of, you would think about it from a aesthetics standpoint. You might not want the subcutaneous fat because it might sag, it might hang places you don't want it to hang. But at the same time, while it might not be something desirable from an aesthetic standpoint,
right,
it's not the most dangerous kind when it comes to disease. The visceral fat is the kind of fat that is the most dangerous when it comes to disease, and that's the kind of fat that's around your organs, and that's kind of deep inside of your body. With that being said, you can expand on that any further if you'd like to, but with that being said, when somebody gets a test, and if they have more visceral fat than they're in a danger level, let's say of visceral fat, are there specific things that we know can target specifically visceral fat that person would need to be starting to implement and do?
Yeah, so there's nothing that is going to necessarily target visceral fat that doesn't target subcutaneous fat. But generally, when somebody, especially when we're talking lifestyle changes, obviously there's medications now, the GLP-1s and stuff, but I'm talking more to exercise and diet. Generally, when somebody starts making those changes, and this is just what I've personally seen on people's DEXA scans, you're going to start losing a disproportionate amount of visceral fat compared to that subcutaneous fat, i.e. your visceral fat's going to start coming off at a higher rate than your subcutaneous fat will, at least initially, until you get to leaner and leaner body compositions.
Yeah. And I think when you actually get the score, it's been a while since I've gotten a DEXA scan, so I'm not exactly sure how it gets represented. But there's like specific ranges, I think, for visceral fat that's like, this is too much, this is too little. Is it based off of body size and age and that kind of stuff, I'm assuming?
Yep. So it's going to tell you, all right, Nick, your visceral fat is in the 10th percentile for your age. And in this case, being lower is better in that you want to be on the low end of that. And so it's going to give you the exact number. So it'll say, you have 300 or 500 grams or whatever. But you'll also know it's comparing you to people of similar age ranges, gender, all that. And so you kind of know where you stand at a population level.
Gotcha. So it gives you a number of actual grams of visceral fat, but then also a percentile. Okay.
Yep.
That's great. Bone density is another thing probably that sets the DEXA scan apart from some other modalities of getting your body fat percentage tested. And so bone density is something that I feel like gets talked more and more about nowadays as well, especially as strength training becomes more talked about and it gets more stressed as being super important, especially as you get older, to fend off a decrease in muscle mass, but also to decrease the likelihood of something called sarcopenia. Talk to us about talk to us just about the general rate of decrease in bone density as people get older, and how we can potentially decrease the rate of decrease of bone density as we get older. Yeah,
so it really affects, unfortunately, women more than men. You do see it in men, but not nearly as common.
Is there a particular reason for that? Is it a
It is there. It's multifactorial, but what happens to women during peri and postmenopause with their hormonal changes we believe it puts them more at risk for it, and that's when you start to see bigger decreases in bone density. As far as mitigating it, Now I want to say too, there are medical conditions that
Right.
can lead to it. So that's kind of a different thing here. If we're just talking somebody normal, really the only way you can truly reverse it or stop it is through training, exercise. And so there's really two main modalities there. That is either heavy loading exercise or high impact exercise. And so essentially what happens when you put a bar on your back or a weight in your hands, you literally, to a very small degree, if you think about your femur, you bend it almost like you would a pencil or something. And that stimulates the body to lay down new bone, and it's stronger than it was before.
When you distinguish that there's two different ways of heavy loading and high impact, how would you, if somebody doesn't know the difference between those two, how would you distinguish and discern between those
So heavy loading, think of those as your general gym movements, squats, deadlifts. They generally need to be compound movements, things that I know for a lot of people can be a little bit scary if they haven't been in the weight room. And that's why we often get people working with trainers, et cetera, so they can be guided on that. High impact is going to be more athletic activity. So everything from doing like guided plyometric training, which we'll do with a lot of our patients, all the way to just doing things for fun, like playing tennis or pickleball, can give you that stimulus.
Totally. So heavy loading, that one's easy. Just lifting a heavy amount of weight, which we're going to dive into a little bit more here in a second. And high impact might be jumping, but it's kind of moving quickly where your bones are having to absorb a lot of force.
Yep, exactly.
A lot of impact.
Exactly.
Heavy loading. Talk to us about how heavy.
Yep.
And now that you guys have been doing this for a little bit, there's some data around this of how heavy people really need to lift, what kinds of lifts, like you said, compound lifts that people need to do, and how heavy they need to go. That actually leads to improvements in bone density. So talk to us about how heavy.
Yep. So really, to preface this, for somebody that hasn't been training, it's just doing something, right? If they haven't been lifting weights, this kind of doesn't apply. When I start when I go into my next point here, this is for people that are quote unquote trained. Right. If you haven't been lifting, start doing anything, and that's enough of a stimulus.
Right.
For trained people, we have really, really good data on it. They actually did a really good study. It's called the Lift More trial, and it's one we've built kind of a lot of our protocols around. And they took really geriatric women in their 60s, 70s that you generally don't see in the weight room lifting heavy. And they had them do essentially four things. They had them overhead press with a barbell. They had them barbell back squat, barbell deadlift, and jump. Things that can often be seen as dangerous, but they were very guided in how they built these ladies up to do it. But the most important part here that gets missed a lot is once they on-ramped these ladies and got them used to the movements, they were lifting in 80 to 85% range of their one rep max. So if people don't know what that means, if hypothetically, if you can do a bench press with 100 pounds for one rep and no more, couldn't do a second no matter how hard you tried, you would need to use at least 80 to 85 pounds to get adequate stimulus for your bones.
Totally. What was the protocol for the jump? Like if you're not using weight.
So
that like the overhead press, back squat, deadlift, that's heavy loading. High impact is the jump. So how did they do the jump?
They actually did it with a barbell on their back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, an empty barbell. And I believe we don't do that quite as much just because that's a little bit higher level. I'll do it in some different ways. But they did it with an empty barbell. And they didn't progress the weight so much, but they kind of progressed the RPE, if I remember right off the top of my head.
I kind of feel like it might be necessary for somebody who's in their 60s and 70s to use a little bit of weight because maybe it's not high enough impact because they're only able to jump like over a credit card. So their landing is not going to provide that much impact because they're probably not like super heavy people either. Yeah,
that actually brings up a really good second point. Is in addition, as we age, this bone loss starts happening, but we start losing, and I know this gets in the weeds, but we start losing muscle, but we start losing a specific type of muscle, and it's called fast twitch muscle fibers at a higher rate. And so doing this higher impact training is kind of killing two birds with one stone, because you're stimulating your bones, but you're also stimulating these fast twitch fibers. And they're so important because, one, they are the fibers that when you're lifting heavy, make you stronger. Generally, stronger people are faster twitch, not always, but generally. But when we're talking falls, if you stumble and try to catch yourself, being able to move fast enough to catch yourself is really, really an important factor to preventing falls. And so this impact training, this jumping, is kind of killing two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, totally. So as you get older, you lose both muscle mass at a certain kind of like rate annually. You lose strength at a certain rate annually. Then you lose power, or these that impact type training at a certain rate annually. And kind of like the strength and power are more of the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers that he's talking about. Type 1 muscle fibers are more endurance type muscle fibers that don't fatigue as quickly. So that's really important to know, really important to understand. I think that's all I wanted to get into in terms of, and I guess the last thing to touch on is the rate of decline of those muscles and of bone density is probably more a factor of not training than it is age, because if you are training as you get older, then the rate of decline might be non-existent or very minimal, or depending on where you're at, right? Like if you don't train at all from 20 to 40, and then you do train from 40 to 50, then you actually can gain from 40 to 50. And so it's obviously person to person. But anything else you have to add or expand on that?
One, yes, it's often thought that once you get to a certain age that you can't put on muscle mass. We had a 73-year-old guy today that in about a 15, 16-week period, he's put on about 3.2 kilos of muscle mass. Wow. So that's significant, and lost fat while he's doing it. But two, the rate of decline. So we have really good data on that. And untrained people, starting as early as your third decade, you can start to lose depending on the study, somewhere between 3 and 8% of your muscle mass, which doesn't seem significant, but if that starts in your third decade and you don't do anything about it, by the time you get to your 7th, 8th decade, you can lose about half the muscle mass that you once had. At that point, you can start to get issues. Now, with the muscle mass, even more importantly, you're losing strength. And so the strength component, it just has more effect on functional activities that you can lose somewhere between 10 to 15% a decade if you're not training. But like you said, reversible, and you can really, really slow or reverse the decline through lifestyle factors. Yeah, totally. And one of the things that should be encouraging for people who maybe haven't trained and they're a little bit older is like the greatest benefit you're going to have, or the greatest benefit is people who have never trained before and then they start training. Like if you've trained for a while, you can still improve, but the percentage at which you improve is going to be greater if you are an untrained individual. And so it's never too late. If it's later, then that you just have more opportunity for growth. And then I want to actually add on one thing, because I think it's important. Like you said, one key thing in terms of muscle as you get older is strength for functionality, so you can do the things that you want to do and you won't require younger people in your life or other people in your life to help you out with every single thing. But it's also, muscle mass is super important metabolically as you get older as well. So do you have anything to add to that, to expand on the importance of muscle as we age in terms of a metabolic standpoint? Yeah, so as you lose muscle as you age, think of muscle as kind of, I guess the simplest, best way to think about it is a glucose vacuum. So when you eat or drink and your blood sugar goes up, the more muscle you have, the more efficient your body is going to be able to take that glucose out of your bloodstream, turn it into muscle glycogen, and put it in the muscle cell. And so you see it a ton as people get into their 5th, 6th decade and talk to them about their diet, and they're eating what a lot of people would consider relatively clean as far as like their carbohydrate sources and stuff. But it tends to happen a little bit more to ladies, unfortunately. If you get to a point where you've lost so much muscle mass that your body doesn't really have anywhere to put it, you'll see people that from the outside looking in, look healthy. But when you look at their blood work, their A1C is pre-diabetic or low diabetic range, super high fasting glucose. And it's just because their body doesn't have anywhere to put the carbohydrates that they're eating or the food that they're eating. So the more muscle you can have, it's going to be protective of that. And then that has downstream effects because we're figuring out that the metabolic markers like your A1C and your fasting glucose have a ton of correlation and impact on your cardiovascular disease risk. So it seems kind of crazy that something that is a lot of times can be a vanity issue, right? And we all want to look good, but putting on muscle literally protects your heart.
Yeah, totally. It's all connected. One thing I wanted to go back on and ask real quick on the bone density side of things. Like you said, probably the number one thing that you can do to improve your bone density and also decrease the rate of bone density decline as you get older is resistance training. Then there's probably protein. Is there any like supplement? Like I think people sometimes take calcium supplements for that. Is that like the most common supplement that can help?
Yes, I would encourage you to get tested first because just like medicine, supplements in the wrong dosage can harm you. And so if you're just a person for whatever reason that your calcium runs super high, you probably don't want to be taking calcium. But yes, calcium, vitamin D, I would say are the two big ones. But another thing that also kind of goes unthought of is your sex hormones. Especially for women when they go through menopause and things get out of whack. But men too, as our testosterone declines, HGH, IGF-1 declines, it can predispose you to it. So making sure those things are in line too.
Okay, gotcha. All right, let's go into the cardio type testing.
Yeah.
The fancy name, cardiopulmonary exercise testing,
test.
The CPET. VO2 max training. I've never done the test before, but I know it's a brutal test. It's basically like, in my, the way I understand it, is you run as hard as you can until you can't go anymore, and you typically have a mask on, and it's basically testing your oxygen. And so to give us a little bit of insight of just like what actually that test looks like if you're watching somebody do it,
so
what's going on.
If you're watching somebody do it, they're going to be wearing what's called a 12-lead EKG, so sticky pads on their chest, and that's measuring the electrical activity of their heart. And so what we like to look at with that is basically how your heart responds to stress. So somebody watching has ever done just a normal stress test, that'll sound familiar. That's what you do. In addition, with the VO2 max, you're also wearing a mask, and it's not like the altitude training mask. It doesn't restrict your breathing. In fact, that would kind of mitigate what we're trying to do. So it's open, but it has these sensors in the little port at the mouthpiece, and what they're doing is they're basically measuring how much oxygen you're bringing into your body versus how much carbon dioxide you're outputting out of it. And so as you go on the test, essentially what happens is you consume more and more and more oxygen, but then you get to a point where you can't anymore. And then that average ends up becoming the number, your VO2 max number. Now, as far as the protocol you're on, it is a hard test, but I will say it is not usually a long test, which is nice. So on average, most people, for somebody that's a runner, you're probably going to be on the treadmill for somewhere between 15 and 22 minutes. And we normally run a specific protocol, which is called the modified Bruce protocol. And so you have 3-minute stages. And what that is you start off walking relatively slow. But then every 3 minutes, the speed and the incline increase on the treadmill up to a certain point, but then you just go until you quit, essentially.
Yeah. And what's happening at the point where you quit? Like, I know you said that you get to a point where you can't take in oxygen anymore. Is it a matter of, like, what's actually happening when you're looking at the EKG, at the numbers, when somebody quits? So
most people, or I say most people, a lot of people, when they quit, and I think you'll appreciate this, their mind quits before their body. Yeah. And so that's something you have to take into account too. For somebody that hasn't been doing a ton of cardio training, you honestly aren't super worried about the actual VO2 max number because it's not real, right? We didn't reach a VO2 max.
Yeah. So let's take that person out. Let's take the person who actually goes all
training,
the way until their body
that's
gives
fair.
out.
So basically what you're going to start to see is we're watching this on our computer monitors. Is this happening? We're seeing a graph.
You're seeing somebody quit early and you're like,
this guy. No. There's no judgment ever because I've done it. I know how bad it is. But we're watching it on a graph and we're seeing the rate of your oxygen consumption. It starts going up. Okay. And we're looking at other things with your heart rate. We can see everything from what's called your O2 pulse, which is basically how much oxygen you're putting out with each pulse of your heart, to your heart rate, to your blood pressure. But for VO2 max specifically, what we're looking at is we're seeing this climb on this graph on our computer monitor. And then generally somewhere around the 15 to 18 minute mark, depending on how fit you are, we start to see that plateau. And essentially what that is your body has reached the max amount of oxygen that it can take into your lungs, diffuse into your blood, pump through your heart, and be taken up by your muscles to fuel the exercise that you're doing, or to buffer the products of that exercise, I guess is the more accurate way to say it. And so what happens there is your body just kind of literally runs out of gas at a certain point.
So somebody who, like you said, the number's gradually going up, then you get to a point where it plateaus, where you can't take any more in. At that point, is it like, what if somebody can go for 8 more minutes at that level of plateau? Is their VO2 max any different than if they only went 2 minutes at that point?
Unfortunately not. And I learned that I've done 3 now.
You need a body and a mind VO2 max.
I know. It's so frustrating. I learned that the very first one I did, I was on the treadmill for 18 minutes. And the second one I did, I was on it for almost 22. But basically that last 3 minutes of my second one was all just in that plateau. And so my VO2 max went up like 1 point. So it's frustrating. It's not, and that's why it's valuable, but it's also frustrating because it's not something you can just push harder and push your number up.
Yeah. I guess what would be actually going on physiologically? Let's say from the standpoint, it'd be really hard. It'd be impossible to determine that somebody goes to the exact same point of mind difficulty.
Right.
Can't
determine it.
But like, let's say hypothetically, if somebody use your example, 18 minutes and 22 minutes, if you pushed yourself as hard as you possibly could mentally at 18 minutes, and then you push yourself as hard as you possibly could till 22 minutes, but your VO2 max really didn't change. What is going on physiologically that would allow you to push longer?
So in that instance, when I started training specifically for VO2 max, we're going to get in the weeds a little bit here. Have you ever heard of lactate thresholds? I'm sure you have, being a runner. So let's frame this. When you're doing this test, as your heart rate starts to climb, your oxygen consumption stays relatively stable. And then you get to, everybody has this point where you reach what's called the first lactate threshold. And so lactate is a waste product that's produced in your blood from exercise. I guess is important to say. In this test, we're using carbon dioxide as a buffer or as an analog for lactate. And it gets really in the weeds how that works, but it's a really, really strong. As your lactate goes up, your carbon dioxide expiration goes up. When you say
using it as an analog, meaning you can't actually track the lactate level.
So you can take blood samples as people go, but it's very cumbersome. Now
So you can, but you're just using CO2 as like a proxy for.
Correct. Okay. Your Tour de France guys, your elite athletes, they're using blood lactate because it's a little bit more specific at what's happening at the muscular level. For us, what we're doing at the medical level, CO2 is more than adequate and it's accurate.
Okay, so I'm sorry I interrupted you. You get to this first lactate threshold.
Yep.
That's kind of where you left off.
Get to this first lactate threshold. And basically what happens there is at the first lactate threshold, your body switches from primarily, now this is all on a spectrum. I want to say this, there's a lot of misnomers around this on social media, that if you're in zone 2, that you're only burning fat, which is not true. It's always some ratio. But basically the easiest way to think about it is at this first lactate lactate threshold, your body has been burning primarily fat through using oxygen that you're breathing in to fuel this activity. Once you cross this first lactate threshold, your ratio of glucose to fat starts going up. So you start having to tap into your muscle and liver glycogen stores. You continue on the test, your heart rate continues to climb, and eventually you reach what's called your second lactate threshold. And so at that point, once you cross your second lactate threshold, you're kind of running on borrowed time, so to speak. Now you can train this and you can get better at it, and certain sports stress this energy system more. But basically at that point, your body is burning 100% glucose or very close to it to fuel the activity. And through burning glucose, the cycle, the process your muscles are having to go through, you end up creating a ton of hydrogen ions. In the general public, it's often thought of as lactic acid. It's really hydrogen ions that create the fatigue in our muscles, but lactate is what's produced in the muscles. And so as those levels start to rise and rise and rise, your muscles literally lose the ability to contract. That said, you can train that and you can make your muscles more resistant to it. So to back up to, I guess, the start of all this, through my high intensity training, through working on my VO2 max and doing that high intensity training, my muscles were basically able to resist that fatigue from that acidic, those hydrogen ions building up for a longer period of time.
So staying here, I hope people, this is awesome. I hope people are tracking. I mean, I'm tracking perfectly. So, toot my own horn, I'm tracking perfectly. You said you're producing a ton of hydrogen ions, which is what's actually going on. Lactic acid is what people think it is. It's not technically that.
Yeah. There's really no such thing as, lactate is acidic, but it's lactate. It's not lactic acid.
Okay. You're producing a lot of hydrogen ions. I think your verbiage was just you become more resistant to hydrogen ions. So is it a matter of you're becoming more resistant? It's not that you're producing less hydrogen ions. It's you're becoming more resistant. And does more resistant mean that you're able to flush the hydrogen ions out faster?
Your body is able to buffer them much quickly. It's called the Krebs cycle. And so if this gets
AP Bio,
this gets into, if you took AP Bio or college bio, you probably remember this. The hydrogen ions are a waste product of what's called the Krebs cycle. We probably don't want to go into all this.
No, probably not. But
the Krebs cycle is how your body produces ATP. ATP is energy. Think of that as energy. As you're doing this high intensity exercise, you're having to produce a ton of ATP very quickly. You build up these hydrogen ions, but you can make your muscles, one, more resistant to the fatigue from them, but you can make your body more efficient at going through the process and getting rid of them. Because you also turn around, and we're cool, man. The way we're made is cool. You take those hydrogen ions and then you turn around and you use them again in the Krebs cycle to create more ATP. So it's pretty cool.
Wow, dang. Bio major over here, right? Exercise science, bio?
Yeah, I started as a bio and then switched to exercise science, took a lot of bio, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's awesome. I took AP Bio in 10th grade and hated it, but I remember some of the things.
I didn't enjoy it so much either.
Okay, now I kind of want to talk about this training in the first lactate threshold and second lactate threshold. First, from the standpoint of kind of what you tapped on just very briefly, like body composition and the energy sources that you might tap into, and then maybe from a performance standpoint.
Let's do it.
From a body composition standpoint, like you mentioned, it's all on a spectrum. You're never burning 100% fat. You're never maybe burning 100% glucose, maybe pretty close. It's always like a ratio. And so I'm going to frame up the conversation a little bit. So when you're in a lower intensity cardio exercise, so if you're like just walking or power walking, let's say, then and you can correct me if I'm wrong too, a higher percentage of what you're burning is going to be coming from fat. And this might be wrong. I'm not greater than 50% is going to be coming from fat. Less than 50% is coming from glucose. That might be wrong. But as you go higher intensity, the ratio switches.
That's correct.
So the ratio switches. So it's never that you are burning completely one and completely the other. It's a spectrum, and as you increase your intensity, the ratio just changes a little bit. So a lot of people out there think, oh, I want to lose body fat, so I need to do low intensity exercise because a larger percentage of fat is being burned. However, a larger percentage of a lower number of calories
Correct.
is being burned.
Correct.
So if you burn 100 calories from a walk, then making up numbers, 70 calories come from fat, 30 calories come from glucose. But if you burn 300 calories from a high intensity workout and 30% come from carb, or 30% come from fat, 70% from glucose, like the amount that you burn from fat is still almost going to be higher sometimes.
Correct.
From the higher intensity work.
Correct.
I guess maybe just like expand on that if you have any more, or
this is such a nuanced topic.
yeah.
So
But I think it's important because a lot of people do think. I mean, I had a client literally ask me the other day, like, I heard low intensity exercise is best for fat loss, and I'm like, yes and no.
correct.
So
Everybody's ratios that they're burning fat versus glucose at are a little bit different. You can get general ballparks for people, but they're a little bit different. But to put this, I guess, as simply as you can, if we're talking losing body fat, which is what people care about, high intensity exercise, if we're comparing apples to apples, wins every time against low intensity exercise.
total time equated.
Total time equated.
Meaning if you did 30 minutes of low intensity, 30 minutes of high intensity is going to win out.
And I think people are probably like, well, no, duh. Yeah. But I'm saying if you could go out and do high intensity balls to the wall exercise 7 days a week, you're going to get to your goal much faster than doing low intensity. But that's not realistic either. And so that's where the nuance comes in. And that is ultimately what the value of the low intensity exercise is. And there's really 2 points with that. Yep. So one, the low intensity exercise, you can just do more often and recover from. And so, and this is just an example, if you can do high intensity exercise and recover from it without breaking down 3 days a week, but you can go out and do zone 2, 6 or 7, well, then at that point, you might actually be surpassing your total amount of calories burned for the week with your zone 2. Maybe, maybe not, but that's just an example. But the second point, the cool point, and this is, I think, also gets missed a lot, our bodies only have a certain potential for how efficiently we can burn glucose, okay, how fast we can burn it. Your potential for how efficient you can get at using oxygen, and then oxygen being fat, is much, much higher. And so I guess the analogy there is like when we first test people on their VO2 max test, we'll often see zone 2 heart rate ranges, or first, if we're talking your first lactate threshold, that often occurs for people on their first test, somewhere between 100 to 105 for older people to 120 to 125 for younger people. Yeah, beats per minute. Yeah. Sorry, that's their heart rate. Yeah. But through training that specific system of your body, 3-4 months later, you'll see people come back in, and now their first lactate threshold doesn't occur until they're at 150 or 155 beats per minute. Your elite marathoners, it doesn't occur a lot of times until they're in the 160s or 170s, depending on their max heart rate. And so then the value of that becomes, as you get more efficient at this, you can raise your exercise intensity relative to what you started at, but still recover from it and do more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So the ability that you have to recover from cardio training largely has to do with how high up on your lactate threshold that you get to.
Yes. It's not always apples to apples, right, and it can be different from person to person, but general statement, absolutely.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. So to kind of come back to the conversation, first from a body composition standpoint, yes, you burn a higher percentage from fat than glucose at lower intensity, and then that changes, the spectrum changes a little bit as you get higher intensity. However, and yes, if you did 30 minutes of low intensity, 30 minutes of high intensity, then you're going to burn more calories, be able to achieve more fat loss from the high intensity. However, sustainability perspective is like you're not going to be able to do high intensity every single day of the week, especially as you get older, unless you're doing unbelievable amounts of recovery things like a professional athlete might do. So they can recover more quickly because they're doing a lot of different treatments, and therefore they can train higher intensities more regularly. But for us, everyday Joes, we're not going to be able to recover as quickly. And so the lower intensity provides the benefit of frequency and recovery. And then the other benefit of the lower intensity is because you can basically delay the raise in lactate during your cardiovascular training. Therefore, allowing you to be able to recover faster. And train harder when you want to train harder. Is that
exactly? So, probably the easiest way to think about it is that if you start off running a 12-minute mile to stay under your first lactate threshold, but you continue to train that, well, in 6 months, you might be running a 9-minute mile. But you're still able to do that super frequently, and so you're burning more calories as a result of that because you're running faster.
Totally. And so just one more thing to say on that, to make it hopefully numerical and hopefully understandable and graspable, is like if you do maybe this 12-minute mile to begin with, and let's say your heart rate is 150 beats per minute, like towards the end of it, then you do a 9-minute mile and your heart rate's the same, 150 beats per minute, then that would be an indication that you will reach your first lactate threshold and therefore your second lactate threshold a little bit later in the game. Because you're more cardiovascularly fit. Your
body is, your aerobic engine is what they call it, is bigger. Your body is more efficient at using oxygen. And then another thing that, as you were talking about that, I thought of, your heart, when you do this low intensity training, actually undergoes some structural changes that are good, that make you more efficient. And so ultimately what happens is when your heart rate gets so high, when you're doing super intense exercise, your heart doesn't have time to maximally fill up with blood because it's having to beat so fast. But when we're talking zone 2, or depending on how you define it, if we're talking training just below your first lactate threshold, your heart has time to maximally eccentrically stretch to fill up with blood. So if that we talk about eccentric and concentric contractions with weightlifting, well, it's important here with cardiovascular training too. And so what ends up happening with that is your heart literally is, its ability to stretch grows, and it's able to fill up with more blood, which then it pumps more blood and it makes each heartbeat more efficient. So I think that's something that often gets missed too.
Totally. So from a performance standpoint, that's one of the benefits as well. One of the things that I had not mentioned is, defining this zone 2, defining this low intensity training, what that actually means. Easy ways to think about it would be a conversational pace. So you're doing a power walk or a light jog where you could hold a conversation with somebody. You might not want to, but you could. Another easy way that some people say is 180 minus your age with your beats per minute. But the technical zone 2 definition is below your first lactate threshold.
Below your first lactate threshold. And the technical definition of your first lactate threshold can differ, but the way they usually define it in the science when we're talking testing actual lactate with your blood is when you get your first discernible raise over your baseline lactate, which is usually about 2 millimoles.
Okay.
Science,
that's
I know.
Great. Is there is that translate to the scale of fats to glucose? Like, how would you be able to communicate that or translate that to that switches when it goes from 51% fat, 49% glucose to 51% glucose, 49% fat? Is there anything like that you can translate it to? Or
so I guess the easiest way to translate it is if you're looking at blood lactate, generally as your blood lactate rises, that is indicative that glucose is being burned at a higher rate. Now, I'll tell you this, in the studies I have looked at and the people we have done it with, it's generally, even in the heart of zone 2, it's not 50-50. It's still like 70-30 trending towards glucose. Now, some people are a little bit higher, but just generally. So you're never burning usually more fat than you are glucose, but it's just maximizing how much of that fatty acid you are burning, I guess is the best way to say it.
So that actually, to go back to maybe correct myself, when you are at a really low intensity. are you actually burning a greater percentage from fat, or is it just a greater percentage than you are when you increase intensity? Like, is it ever actually above 50% fat, or is it just like 30% and then it goes down from there?
I don't know this for a fact, to be honest, but from what I have seen, I've never seen a person that is burning greater than 50% fat, even at rest.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why what I was saying it originally. I was like,
No,
I think I might be wrong on this, but that kind of goes back to the point that I'll hit just one more time, and then when I get a performance of like, actually, from the standpoint of fat loss, and people thinking that lower intensity training is better. No, from the standpoint of thinking because you're targeting fat for your energy source.
It's not.
However,
it's not body fat. You're not burning body fat while you're running, right?
Exactly.
It's just fatty acids.
Exactly. However, like I think that for a lot of my clientele, more of it should be lower intensity because of the sustainability of it,
Correct.
The recovery of it, it's less intimidating to go do. And so my vote for low intensity is because of that reason rather than because you're burning body fat and you're burning your belly fat. And so I want to just to
don't think I'm crapping at low intensity. We use it with our patients for a reason. I don't like people to think they're doing something that they're not. You know what I mean? Exactly. I want them to know what they're doing. Totally. And we have all of our patients do primarily low intensity cardio.
Yeah. No doubt. Okay, now talking about from the standpoint of like maybe more training for we've talked about when I train for a half marathon and for a full marathon. I have heard this talked about before. Your cardiorespiratory fitness thought of as like a triangle where you want a wide base, a wide, be able to do low intensity for a long period of time, strong zone 2, and then a tall peak being your VO2 max, being as tall as possible and push as long as possible for some of the reasons that we've already talked about, right? Like if you do a 12-minute mile at this heart rate, then you could do a 9-minute mile at the same heart rate. Like that is a good evidence that you are more, that your base is a little bit bigger.
Exactly.
If somebody was to, let's say they just have a mini triangle, right? They don't have any cardiorespiratory fitness. They've never done long training. They've never really done high intensity training. How would that person start off thinking about their triangle? Let's frame up the conversation specifically from like a cardiorespiratory fitness rather than like because if they were doing a sport, like maybe they need to do some sort of high intensity. So let's just think about it from a cardiorespiratory health standpoint.
Yeah. So my general recommendation would be to start off is just, unless you're on some kind of time crunch where you're trying to train for a specific race or something, is build your base as big as possible. And so that's the low intensity training. I would much rather you run more often or bike, whatever you're doing at a low intensity, but do it more frequently, than try to start sprinkling in intensity too quick.
Yeah, totally. Then if somebody, I'm going to think about a lot of my clients, somebody who's trained a decent amount over a number of years, maybe like 10 years, let's say, but they're 40 years old. They've done high intensity training, especially when high intensity was popular. It still is big, but it was most popular. But they've also done some long runs over the years and whatnot. And so they've got a pretty good triangle, and they're 40 years old, and they just like want to continue to do cardio because maybe they enjoy it to a certain extent and want to stay healthy. Like, what ratio of training, or how do you think about how much time you should be doing high intensity versus low intensity from the standpoint of long-term health?
So a lot of this depends on the person and the context and really your total weekly mileage. The popular thing right now is the whole 80-20 rule, that 80% of your low intensity or 80% of your volume should be low intensity, 20% high intensity. We really got that from elite runners who are running ungodly amounts of mileages a week. For somebody that's not training as often, a lot of times they can get away with it, but sometimes for a 40, 50, 60-year-old, they can't. So I think it takes working with a coach or working with a trainer like you that can really dial that in and kind of turn those knobs as you go. But ultimately, if we're talking performance, in a perfect world, you want to, one, get as much volume in as you can at as high intensity as you can sustain to improve your performance. But that's much easier said than done.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that determine what your ratio should be of obviously like how much you enjoy what you're doing, how quickly you can recover, all that kind of stuff. If somebody was to specifically, so much of this is context based that it's so hard to come up with a question.
Oh yeah.
But let's say that same person, that 40-year-old who is pretty well trained, but they're like VO2 max. That's I went in, I got it tested. I want to increase that number. How would you go about training to increase that number? They get energized because they hear it's the number one thing with longevity. Like, let's freaking go after this. How would I do it?
Yep. So the most studied way, the most popular way is you're going to do what's called zone 5 training. And this zone 5 is the top of the 5-zone heart rate model. There's a few different heart rate models. So some people would call it zone 3, but we're going to call it zone 5 here today. And essentially what that is you're training above that second lactate threshold. Okay. So this is balls to the wall, all out. The most studied, or one of the most studied kind of protocols to do that is what's called the Norwegian 4x4. And essentially what that is that is a 4-minute interval where you're either running or biking at the fastest pace you can sustain for that 4 minutes, followed by a 4-minute break. And then you do that 4 times, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I think what gets missed in that a lot, and what I see in patients a lot, is that does not mean you go for that 4 minutes 100%, because you can't sustain 100%. It is the pace that you can sustain for all 4 minutes for all 4 intervals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for all 4 intervals, that would. And yeah, the first time out, you're not going to get it right.
No, but you gotta tweak. You gotta experiment with it a little bit.
For sure. And it's one of those things where it's like you go out and do it the first time and you do it wrong. It's not like you're not going to get any benefit.
No,
you'll always get benefit, but the ideal way to do it, like you said, is find the highest intensity that you can hold on to, so that like at the end of the 4th interval, right at the end of the 4th minute, you're just like done.
Yeah.
You cannot hold on to that pace any longer. You've hit a wall.
As you get fitter and you're doing these until you start manipulating rest periods and things like that, you might not even get above into zone 5 on that first interval.
Yeah.
But in that second one, you will at the end. The third one, you might halfway through. And then the 4th one, you probably will be there for 2 to 3 minutes, which is terrible.
Gotcha. So then what is if the idea is that you want to train above your second lactate threshold, but you are only really getting there during a short period of time during these, 8 times 32 minutes?
Yep.
Then what is the magic from getting above the second threshold? Is the magic just like getting pretty darn close to it?
Unless we're splitting hairs, as long as you're getting close to it.
Yeah.
Basically at the base of it, you're just trying to make your body get better at consuming and using oxygen.
Yeah.
And so that's not just your lungs and heart, that's your muscles as well. And so that also makes me think of another good point is like if you're a cyclist and you bike all the time, well, when you go do your VO2 max test, you don't need to run because you're training your muscles on the bike. And so for a lot of people, initially the aerobic system, the heart and lungs, is what limits them. But ultimately, what ends up limiting you in this zone 5 training is your muscular system. It's the ability to buffer those hydrogen ions and their ability to resist fatigue in this high lactate environment.
Yeah. So basically, if you're that type of person who's just like VO2 max is the thing I want to focus on, you're going to have to, and I feel like at any level, a 1-to-1 ratio potentially of work to rest is going to be good. If it's only 30 seconds, then you're going to need to do more than 4 sets probably. Correct. If you want to optimize how you go about improving your VO2 max, but some sort of 1-to-1 for enough volume so that by the end of it you're cooked. And doing that, a couple times a week? Would you do 2-3 times a week maybe? I know it's context dependent.
Again, I know this is hard. I would say in general, if we're talking to somebody in their 40s, 50s, 60s, once a week is more than enough and sustainable in that it is going to, I would rather you do it once a week for 6 months than try to do it twice a week for 6 weeks and then get hurt.
Yeah, totally.
You're going to get more benefit out of that.
Totally. Is that because now I'm just exploring my own curiosity. Is that because the heart just takes a little bit? Does it take time?
Yep,
to adapt?
Yes,
that's like it's just like you can only if you put a high level of stress, high intensity level of stress in a short period of time, the rate at which it's going to adapt is still only going to be so much.
You're going to get a larger degree of adaptations over being able to do it over a longer period of time. Now, if you told me, Griff, I've got to do a VO2 max in 4 weeks, yeah, we would do VO2 max work 3 times a week. Because we're going to get as much as we can in that time period. But ultimately, time is going to be the king there, and that it's going to take your body time to create those adaptations.
Totally. It's kind of like if you're looking to build muscle, you could train 2 times a day. If your goal is to build as much muscle as possible in the next 2 weeks, then you would want to train a couple times a day, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you do, it's kind of like the work to benefit ratio is not that much bigger.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to get a whole lot extra benefit from doing that sort of thing. So
brings up a good point too. It makes me think a lot of times training for performance is not necessarily, or it can be at odds with training for longevity, right? Because trying to raise your VO2 max in 4 weeks, you're going to get a lot fitter than you are now really quickly, but you're not going to be able to sustain that forever. And if you try to do that forever, you would probably end up hurt.
Yeah, totally. Let's go to maybe the reverse side of the equation. The same person is now like, okay, I want to improve my zone 2. I want to be able to I currently run a 9-minute mile, and my average heart rate is this. I want to be able to run a 8-minute mile with that same average heart rate.
Yep.
What would be the training modality? What's the 4x4 for the zone 2, if you will?
Unfortunately, and this is my least favorite form of training, but it's just time spent in zone. And so there's really no magic to it. One caveat I would say though is if we're comparing apples to apples, it is better. You're going to create more adaptations with one 60-minute session than you will with 2 30-minute sessions, just because of the types of adaptations that take place in zone 2. Now that said, that doesn't mean if you haven't been running, go try to run for an hour straight.
Right.
But when you start kind of manipulating these variables, turning these knobs, I would rather people increase the duration a little bit of their sessions first, than start adding more sessions.
Totally. I want you to expand on why that is. And so again, just to recap, like if somebody is looking to improve their zone 2 or their base of their cardiorespiratory fitness, you're probably not going to get as much bang for your buck from doing, let's say, 4 30-minute sessions compared to 2 1-hour sessions.
Correct.
Why is that?
So when we're doing zone 2, we're really working on what's called the mitochondria in the muscle cells. And so you touched on this a little bit. This is one of the big differences between the slow twitch and the fast twitch muscle fibers, is that the slow twitch fibers are built to run on oxygen, and that's because they have larger and a much higher degree of mitochondria in them. Mitochondria, if you remember AP Bio, is the powerhouse of the cell, and that's ultimately what takes this oxygen we breathe in and turn it into energy. And so what we know about zone 2 exercise is that with about one bout of it, the longer you go, it's just like working out, the higher the stress is on those mitochondria to continue to run through that process of taking oxygen, turn it into ATP, taking oxygen, turning it into ATP. And so you end up putting a more efficient stimulus on them when you do that zone 2 for a longer period of time versus multiple shorter sessions, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like to me, if I was somebody who's listening to this and I'm like, I want to improve my zone 2, I would think like, okay, first off, pick the cardiorespiratory fitness modality that you would enjoy doing the most, whether it's running, biking, swimming, you name it. Then pick a certain duration of time that's a little bit above where your current level of fitness is. If you've not doing anything, maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes.
And start small, start
progressively
slow.
Over time. Increase the overall duration, right? So if it's like you currently do 2 30-minute sessions a week, then the next week do 2 35-minute sessions, and the next week 2 40-minute sessions, so on and so forth. And you go to end up being at a place where maybe you're doing 3 75-minute sessions a week, or maybe it's even more beneficial to do like 2-hour sessions.
Right.
So that's basically how I guess we would think about kind of progressing.
I think, again, the context, but if we're talking for somebody that's listening to this, that's just wanting to be healthier, doing this more for the longevity, there's probably no need to go over an hour with these sessions. If we're talking somebody that wants to run marathons, then you need to start looking at pushing those sessions out longer and longer and longer.
Totally. I'm having a blast. I feel like I'm going to go back and watch this episode and take so many more notes and make them more organized and everything. This has been a masterclass. But I think the last thing that I want to get into, and this I know nothing about, is the peptides thing. So it's very briefly, I feel like peptides are, and correct me if I'm wrong, mainly used for recovery and healing more so than anything else. So give us the general overview, because I don't know anything. I can't even preface the question at all. So give us an overview of what peptides are and what they're used for.
So
because they're pretty new.
Yeah, it's a relatively new thing, and I want to preface this by saying, and Dr. McAvoy Edwards tell people this all the time, we don't have a ton of human data on these yet. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Right, for sure. But the animal data we have and the clinical data we do have is really, really strong for soft tissue healing, for injury healing, for recovery. But essentially a peptide it's a hormone. And so the two most popular ones right now, and there's a few, are BPC 157 and TB 500. These are both natural molecules that are made in the body. BPC 157 is actually made in your gastric acid in your stomach, but it stands for Body Protection Compound 157, so it's aptly named. But more or less what these things do is they bind to receptors in your soft tissue, and they signal your body to kickstart the healing process is the simplest way to say it, unless we want to really get in the weeds. But that's the best way. I guess I could frame that is they're not like a protein. They aren't the building blocks that heal the soft tissue, but they're signalers that are telling your body, hey, it's time to heal something. So we've had really, really good success with them with soft tissue injuries is what they're primarily used for. Tendonitis, muscle strains, even I know some football players use them for contusions and stuff in season. But there are also some other peptides. So another one that's being studied right now that's really exciting is a peptide called retatrutide, and I might not be saying that correctly. Reta is what is what it is called a lot in the underground. Bodybuilders are already using it for show prep, but essentially what it is, so your GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic, Wegovy. Then there's GIP agonists, which are the name's slipping my head. This isn't my world, but essentially there's three receptors that the Ozempic type medications can work on to help people lose weight or lose body fat. But each medication only works on one receptor at a time or one system at a time. But this peptide, retatrutide, it works on all three at the same time. Wow. So I personally know a guy who uses it for his show prep in bodybuilding, and he feels like it's a game changer. Now, that's not, medical evidence. Yeah. And then there's another one, if people have ever heard of Dr. Mike Israetel, he's talked about it on his podcast a little bit, but it's a myostatin inhibitor. And so it would be used if it is cleared to be used in humans. It would be used essentially like Ozempic is, but for muscle gain. Wow. Which would be pretty crazy. Have you ever seen the pictures of the cows that are just like jacked up? Yeah. So those are cows that essentially they have a gene that causes myostatin inhibition. Wow. And so that's what these peptides would essentially do. Now I haven't seen anybody that's taken these, so I don't know how well they work, but they're being studied. Yeah. Wow.
Interesting. Well, peptides sound fascinating. I might have anytime I might have an injury in the future. Hopefully, knock on wood, I don't. But I might have to try one of these things out.
We'll say if you look into them, you can. There's a lot of them. Like you can buy them off Amazon in pill form. Don't know what you're getting. Maybe don't know what you're getting. BPC is a little bit different, but the rest of them, they're probably not going to be able to withstand going through the acid in your stomach and small intestine and then pass through your liver. So if you're going to spend the money on it, I would recommend going somewhere that's legitimate, inject them.
Yeah. And like you said, it's more soft tissue, so like a stress fracture of my hip, I'm not going to really get too much benefit from
Probably, probably not, although it'd be worth a try. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. All right, something to think about. Last thing I want to, it's kind of going back to an extent, some of the conversation we had before, but just kind of metabolism, body composition. One of the things that I'm curious about is how hormones impact our metabolism. I think the most common case of this is generally when females are getting older in that perimenopause, menopause stage, and they're having a big hormonal shift. It becomes harder to lose weight. When I think about metabolism, I try to just break it down to calories in, calories out, and calories in is relatively easy to track if you sit down and track it. Calories out is a little bit harder to specifically identify, but basically we use the number TDEE, total daily energy and expenditure, and that basically breaks down to basal metabolic rate, your BMR, your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, your exercise activity thermogenesis, and then your thermic effective food. It's basically kind of like those four things. And so when I think about, okay, are hormones holding this person back? I think like, okay, it's got to be negatively impacting their calories out, their TDE side of things to a certain extent. So is it a matter of it's like slowing down their BMR, the number of calories they burn at rest? Is it just decreasing the number of calories that they burn at just living their daily life? They decrease the number of calories they burn when they're just like walking around. When they exercise, they burn less calories because of the hormonal shift. What's exactly going on to the metabolism when there's a hormonal shift?
Right. So I want to preface this by saying I'm not a female hormonal expert. Obviously, that's not my forte. So I'm just going to speak in general with humans, just with a slant towards women here. Yeah. But when women go through menopause, one of the big things that you see is estrogen and testosterone ratio gets out of whack. And men, our testosterone starts to decline. Okay, and so with that, a whole host of things can happen because all these hormones are on such intricate feedback loops with each other. But one thing you often see there is, and this is going back to the bone density conversation, the same thing that happens is around this age, women start to have much, much more trouble with their body composition and muscle mass. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is they start losing muscle at a faster rate. And I'm sure there's probably some other factors that I might not be educated enough to know or aware of. But I do know this is a big one, is that when you start to lose that muscle mass, your NEAT goes down. But then it also affects your exercise activity thermogenesis. So you end up just burning less and less calories. On top of that, you feel crappy. And so it creates this kind of vicious cycle there.
Yeah. So it sounds like, generally speaking, a hormonal shift can generally decrease the number of calories that you're burning across all of the different sectors of the TDEE. But one way that you can maybe fight that off is to make sure that you're resistance training so that you have muscle. Any other ways that, other than like maybe like hormone replacement,
right?
Are there any other things that people can do when they feel like their hormones are the thing that's slowing down their metabolism?
So yes, you can, and I've done this personally, you can really affect your hormones with supplementation, food choices, but specifically for men, again, women, your hormones are way more complex, so I'm sorry. But for men, vitamin D, zinc, magnesium are three really, really big ones. There's some
for testosterone.
Yeah, for testosterone. There's some natural, I guess, kind of herbs that you can take that have differing levels of evidence in the literature. But like, for example, I've done these experiments on myself. I've raised my testosterone 200 points simply with supplementation. Wow. And no other changes. So
those three?
Yep, those three.
What type of magnesium?
It was just a ZMA supplement, so I think it was citrate in that one, if I remember right. I'm on a different one now.
Gotcha.
But I was also deficient. So for somebody that's not deficient, it might not help. So that's where the testing comes in. But that doesn't. I say all that to say, if you get tested and you're low, you don't necessarily have to hop on hormone replacement therapy.
With your vitamin D, how much were you taking? I generally recommend it. I think it's like 1,000 to 3,000 IUs. What were you taking? I
was mega dosing. I was taking 10,000 IUs a day.
I was recommended to do that after my injury.
Were you?
To take 10,000 IUs
for your hip?
to help my hip.
It's really vitamin D is really important for bone health. I do think it's important if you're taking a large dose of vitamin D, take vitamin K with it.
Yeah.
But I was taking 10,000 IUs a day. Up to that test, and then since then I've settled in at about 5,000.
Yeah, okay.
It's kind of my maintenance dose.
Fascinating.
But the supplements, diet, exercise, you can't fight off menopause with that or anything, but you can have very, very positive effects on your hormonal profile with those three things.
Sweet, awesome. Well, this has been an absolute blast, an absolute masterclass on so many different levels. I hope you stuck with us. I hope you stuck with us mentally, and also you're still present. I hope you took a lot of notes, and I hope you have identified at least one, if not maybe two or three things that we talked about today that you're looking to improve on, whether that's your muscle mass, your strength, your bone density, your VO2 max, your zone 2. Like, we covered so many different things and got very specific with how you can improve those metrics. So start to take some action and implement some of the stuff that Griffin talks about today to start improving these things. If you want to go learn more about Paradigm Health, make sure you go follow them on Instagram. Go to their website. We'll have it linked up in the show notes down below. Obviously, it's here in Nashville, so those of you guys here in Nashville, then go check it out. If you're not here in Nashville, then come to Nashville, check it out. Any other place that people should go learn more about all this stuff? Or?
Man, Peter Attia is a really great resource. I'm trying to think. Dr. Rhonda Patrick is a really great resource. Huberman can be. Yeah. So if you're passionate about it, there's a lot of resources out there to learn.
What's Huberman can be?
So he's I love Huberman. I listen to Huberman every episode. Huberman, I would say, is a little bit more kind of on the biohacking frontier of the space as opposed to like established medical things we know work space.
I think part of that is also just he's gotten so popular and he's had so many people on where he gets
you gotta get like new content, right? I say all that to say I've never heard him say anything bad. I just think for the average listener, sometimes we probably are focusing on things that probably don't need to focus on.
Well, no, I mean, actually, I think that's honestly the perfect way to finish from the standpoint of the reason why it says that is because if you're the general person out there who's mainly listening to this, who's wanted to be healthier, get a little stronger, build a little muscle, maybe lose a little fat, it's like doing some of these biohacking things is not going to be the answer. It's not going to take you from point A to point Z. It might move the needle by a fraction of a percent, but it's like these tried and true things of the training, the nutrition that is going to make up 80, 90, 95% of the results that you want to get. So it's like focus on those things. Don't step over dollars to pick up pennies.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things.
Can I hit you with a crazy stat on that?
Yeah.
So if you look at if you have end-stage renal disease, kidney disease, your risk of mortality goes up like 40% over the next 5 or 10 years, depending on the study you look at, how they define it. Diabetes raises your risk like 30%. Smoking raises your risk 20 to 25% of dying from any cause. Going from, if we look at your age, how old are you?
30.
So if we look at a 30-year-old male, going from the bottom 25% of 30-year-old males in your VO2 max level to the top 5% decreases your risk of dying by 80%.
Wow.
So getting more cardiovascularly fit, getting fit is more powerful than diabetes, smoking, kidney disease is negative. Obviously, we don't want to have those things. Totally. But like you said, don't pick up pennies and miss the dollars, right?
Totally. I think that's one of the most frustrating things sometimes.
I fight it all the time.
Asking about supplements, asking about the right perfect type of protein powder, the right creatine, and all the, and like how much creatine to take. Like that stuff's important.
Right.
But it's like, if you're going to the McDonald's drive-thru a number of times a week, then stop asking me about creatine.
Yeah, spend your time doing some Zone 2, not researching the perfect type of creatine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, love it. Griffin, this has been a blast, man. Appreciate you joining. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button down below. Check out Paradigm Health down in the description below as well. If you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button so you get notified of future episodes. But other than that, that's all we got today. Griffin, it was an absolute blast.
Appreciate you,
brother.
bro. Enjoyed it.
Awesome. See y'all.
See ya.